the scenes with LTM. LTM. LTM.
Hi, I'm Angela Dias with Little Theatre of Manchester. Welcome to Behind the Scenes with LTM, where we pull back the curtain and show you everything that goes into putting on a show at LTM. Well, maybe not everything, but pretty close. So, first things first, how does LTM decide which shows we're going to do in the season? Well, joining me today to talk about that are Debi Freund, Shane Kegler, and Dwayne Harris. Debi is the artistic director and a veteran of LTM. In her many years at LTM, she's done it all. She's acted, directed, sewn costumes, found props. She's also been involved in choosing which plays to do. Shane is the associate artistic director. He's also acted and directed at LTM. He's also been involved in choosing a season. Dwayne Harris is LTM's executive director. And while he doesn't directly choose shows, he is responsible for a key factor in deciding which plays we want to include in a season. Welcome. Hello, guys. So glad you could be here today.
Hello.
Hi. All right. So what is the first step in the process of doing a season, choosing a season? Debi, do you want to take that first?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing that we all take a look at is the budget. And we take a look at what the budget is, how we finished off the year previously, what worked and what didn't work, what we heard good things about from the audience and from our own, subscribers and our volunteers. And then the first thing that goes on after that in the new season is what's known as the charge to play reading. And so that's done by the artistic director. A charge is written as to what the artistic director expects for the coming year and what they want the play committee to look at in terms of casting, in terms of opportunities, both for technical staff, all of our volunteers, actors. Also, we look at two different types of audiences. One is our mainstay, long-term subscriber base and what they're interested in, and also in terms of what we're looking for to develop new audiences. And then many times we'll have a theme, whether or not it's looking at fairly new Broadway shows or stuff that has to do with the Manchester history or whatever, and we'll write that into the charge as well. And then it's presented to a committee of 5 to 6 people.
That's the play reading committee, right?
Correct.
That's right. How do you pick the play reading committee? Are there certain people that you want on the committee? I don't mean like names. I mean like, positions. I need names. No, I don't need names.
Well, every artistic director does it differently. I can tell you what I do. I look at people from the artistic board and from the governing board. I look at technical staff and performing staff. I look at regular membership. And between all of those areas, a committee is selected.
Can people who are not on the committee suggest shows?
Oh, absolutely. We strongly encourage all LTMers, even community people, please, to send forward shows that you'd like to see. It doesn't mean we'll necessarily do it, but we'll certainly consider it. We do have very strict rules about when within the committee, when people put forward shows that they recommend, they have to be considered.
Shane, what is the process the play reading committee uses to come up with 5 shows?
Yeah, I mean, it can change from committee to committee, but generally they all kind of come to a consensus of what they're going to do in terms of the selection. Like we've done it in the past where we make sure if a play is submitted, a certain percentage of the committee has to read it. There's just a lot of plays, so one member can't read every single selection, but we try and make sure a good majority of the committee is reading each selection.
Mm. But you still end up reading a lot of plays during
You
the
do.
time that you're on the committee, right?
Oh, yeah. We have a large library in the green room to pick from. A lot of plays, luckily, these days are online. If we can't find a copy of it, I know Dwayne will try and buy a copy for us to be able to read.
How does the play reading committee balance choosing shows that appeal to our subscribers as well as trying to grow a new audience? It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It really is, because another thing with the committee is everybody has a different opinion. So again, it's very important to keep in mind when you're on that committee, not just shows that you like, but shows our audience might like and shows our new audience might like. Because if you're just doing the same kind of shows over and over, you're bringing in the same audience, and it just doesn't grow. So we've made a point over the past few seasons where we do want there to be at least one show in that season that, sometimes we call it, maybe it's a risk show where our big audience might not be their style, but it's going to start bringing in some new audience members. And if we do a great job with the show, hopefully we now have them as permanent audience members.
Now, typically, the LTM season consists of 3 plays and 2 musicals. Why is that?
It hasn't always been that way. It's been maybe the last 6 or 7 years that has happened. I think that started with Next to Normal. The reason being is that there is a great treasure trove of small musicals out there, which we never really did. We never even took into consideration, because our end of season show was always a great big musical with 25 to 35 people, huge sets, lots of things involved in the production of it. And so very small musicals were historically left out. And so started adding a second musical. There's no rhyme or reason to that. We're not bound to that. We just have really liked it for the last number of years, and we continue it. It's the same thing with straight shows and musicals or dramas and comedies. There's no rules regarding it. It's what the committee puts together in terms of what comes out in the charge, and everybody's working to try to make what they think a great slate of plays working together would be.
What are some of the other considerations the play reading committee has to keep in mind when they're choosing shows for season?
Well, let's start with just casting, and what your cast looks like, what you need for a cast, and what you think you're going to be able to get. So, for example, a number of years ago, we did 42nd Street. 42nd Street is a huge tap dance show, and it's not only got loads of tap dancers, but it's got a lot of male tap dancers. That probably would not be something that would be top of our list nowadays, because it would be really hard to recruit for that. So there could be something special built into the show that we think would be difficult, or that we think gives more opportunities to more people in LTM. So we want to make sure we have opportunities for designers and costumers and maybe great lighting in some show. And then you also want to make sure you have roles for men and women, for people of all different ages and different races, and even different abilities. So that's just one of the things that we take into consideration. Shane?
There's a whole range of things, right, Shane?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you got to take into consideration the technical aspects of the show, the sets, the props, the costumes. If you look at your season and you got 5 shows that are all big sets and big costumes, you got to start thinking about your budget. You got to start thinking about the space we have at LTM in terms of storage and building these things. So you can't do 5 shows with enormous sets, enormous costumes, enormous prop lists. So that goes into the consideration of selecting the plays to make sure it's well balanced between big sets, simple sets, just to make sure we can flow with these shows and we don't have to worry about going over budget or where we're going to store all this stuff.
Obviously, as you said, Shane, if you had 5 big costume shows in a row, that's not going to fly. But what if you have a show that has some, period pieces, period costumes? Does that automatically get thrown out? Because
No. I mean, we have wonderful designers that we've had. Some of them have contacts to rent the costumes. LTM has a lot of costumes up in the attic. I've worked with a costumer for the past couple shows. We'll build them from scratch. So it all kind of depends on which designers are attached to which shows. But just because the costumes were like period pieces and extravagant wouldn't necessarily, we wouldn't dismiss it.
what happens after the play reading committee comes up with its slate of 5 shows? Where does it go then? Those recommendations, and they are recommendations, right?
It goes to the artistic director, and the artistic director decides whether or not the slate matches the charge that was put out. And if that is so, then the artistic committee basically gives it its seal of approval. And in the interim, we've also been doing things like clearing rights. And I know you're talking to Dwayne about that. So that's happening currently, because there would be nothing worse than to pick a season of shows we wound up not being able to do.
As Debbie mentioned, one of the things the play reading committee needs to know is whether the rights to a play are available. That's where Dwayne Harris comes in, and we talked to him about that. Okay, Dwayne, one of the things LTM has to consider when choosing plays to produce is the availability of rights to a show. What does that mean?
So first, it's important to understand that when a playwright or a group of people create a play, it's generally not themselves that are out there performing it or deciding who gets to perform it. What they ultimately end up doing is selling the performance rights to those shows to what we typically call royalty houses. And so there's different groups. Some of the names are familiar: Dramatist, Samuel French, which is a name if you've ever picked up a script and looked at the back, you'll almost always see Samuel French's name on it. Musical Theater International. Those are some of the big names. They actually own the performance rights to those shows. So what that means is the playwright, the authors, the lyricists, the composers, those people have all given permission to those royalties houses to decide who gets to perform the shows. So when we decide we want to do a show, one of the first checks is whether or not we can get permission from those houses to do that show. And we then, in turn, assuming that the show is available in our area and assuming that there's no reason that the royalties houses don't want to prevent us from performing it for various reasons, they'll give us permission. And then we then have to pay rights, those fees that I mentioned, to perform the show. And so they will tell us, you need to pay this amount of money, normally based on the number of performances. And then they give us permission, essentially, to do that show. And that's the only way that we're able to do the show, unless for some reason that we have direct permission from the playwright themselves, or it's one of those select shows that are, I can't remember the year at this point, but that are basically in the public domain. Shakespeare, for example, is a good example of that.
Right. Well, how do you go about getting the rights to a show? Who do you call? What do you tell them?
Sure. Yeah, so we have to reach out to those houses. We have a direct contact there. We have to tell them what dates we want to perform the show, specific dates, the exact calendar dates we want to perform the show, how many performances, how big we expect the houses to be for those shows, and what our ticket prices are going to be. And then based on that information, they sort of come up with an estimate for how much you have to pay. They ask for how big your house is going to be and the ticket prices, because they don't want to charge you such a high fee that you're not going to be able to make any money on the show. But at the same time, they want to collect their money. And for us, it is normally the largest expense for producing a show that we have. The amount we spend on costumes, sets, props, all of that stuff, it pales in comparison to what we pay for the rights for the show.
I'm glad you brought that up because I don't think people realize that when they're buying a ticket, that's part of what that money, what that revenue is going to. And it's a big chunk of what they're seeing.
That's correct. It's a huge chunk. Those houses charge different things, different amounts based on things like whether or not it's a player musical, or whether or not it's a very popular show, or if it's an older show. There's all those things that go into determining the price of it. But for us, it is a huge amount of money. The other thing that we have to tell them, they sort of know it by now, but they do specifically ask whether or not we are a professional in the sense, do we pay actors a reasonable rate for their performance, or are we all volunteer? The fact that we are all volunteers does play into the fee that they charge. But again, it is a huge expense for us.
Mm. And what is more expensive? Rights to a play or a musical?
Yeah, definitely a musical. It was close to $10,000. It's going to cost us to perform in the Heights for the typical 9 performances that we do our shows. For other desert cities, which you are intimately familiar with, we would have paid $900 for a full run of that show. Mm-hmm. So it is, it's a huge difference.
Well, you've already alluded to this, but what are some of the things that affect LTM's ability to acquire the performance rights?
Sure. So a lot of the shows, like, for example, Hamilton and things like that, shows that are well known, they are not immediately available to other groups to perform. So, you see a big show on Broadway, you see Wicked, you see Hamilton, you see, for the longest time, Mamma Mia. You see those shows. They are the people that produce those shows and put those shows together. They're normally taking those shows on big national tours all over the country. So they're not going to allow any other group to perform it because it may impact their ability to charge much larger fees and much larger houses all over the country. For us, being in proximity to New York and Boston also sometimes plays into other decisions. They want to, the people that own the rights to these shows, they want to make sure that they can get the largest amount of money out of it. And so if you compare, us to even something like the Bushnell, if there's any chance that the show is going to be done at the Bushnell, they're probably not going to let us do it in the near future.
Dwayne, can publishers include conditions to the rights even when we do get them?
Sure. I mean, almost always there are sort of language things that they include. So sometimes they will very explicitly say to you that you can't change any of the demographics of characters in a show. So you can't change gender of characters, even for potentially characters where the gender doesn't matter. So there are a lot of restrictions they can do, such as that. And just inherently in all these contracts are agreements that you not change any of the language of the shows itself. So if you have an actor that's struggling with understanding why their character uses word A instead of word B, there's a tendency to want to just change that one word. But we have to remind our performers that we're not allowed to. The part of our agreement is that we won't change any of the language that the playwright included. He obviously had some sort of intent, and we have to honor that intent. And, one of the things that we never want to have happen is for one of those rights houses to be upset with us, because it could potentially mean that whole library of work is no longer available to us. So it's something we take very seriously at LTM.
Thanks, Dwayne. Great job explaining what goes into getting the rights to a show. Okay, Debbie, once we have the rights to a show, what happens next?
And from there, it starts moving into the announcement of the season. We start recruiting for directors, and we start getting ready for we announce over the summer, but then we start really pushing off as we move into the fall show. And then the subscribers, we start recruiting subscribers again, and we everything goes back up again in January.
This is LTM's way of choosing a season and picking shows for a season, but it's not the only way, right?
No, I mean, Shane and I have worked for numerous theaters, other theaters, but all theaters still have to take the basic considerations when they're choosing their season. They have to consider the space that they have, requirements, how much money they have to produce a show, what they've got for volunteers and costumes and designers. So all of these things all come together. They may not have a charge, or they may vote differently or something like that, but we're all considering the same, basically the same variables in choosing. It's a very, at least for us, it's a fairly warm and community group process that brings together people from all different parts of the LTM community to make the decision. It's probably one of the most important things we do every year is choosing the following season's shows.
That's true. And having been on play reading myself a couple of times, it's that responsibility that, can weigh heavily on you. You come up with this season that you think, oh, it's going to be great. And most of the time it is, because we have people who are committed to taking the care that it needs to put together a season and satisfy so many different responsibilities. So thank you to anyone who's ever been on play reading committee. Thanks, Debbie, Shane, and Dwayne, for being part of the first installment of Behind the Scenes with LTM, part of LTM at Home, our series of virtual programming. We'll be doing new interviews every few weeks and posting them on YouTube. Now, if you have any questions about anything we talked about in this video or topics you'd like to see discussed, you can email us at bts@cheneyhall.org. To find our new videos when they are posted, you can go to www.cheneyhall.org/YouTube and on Facebook at Little Theatre of Manchester. Links to these, as well as our other social media pages, are in the description box below.
Behind the scenes with